Hey guys, it's Euan with the Air Zoo. The book Spy Pilot, Francis Gary Powers, the U-2 Incident, and a Controversial Cold War Legacy is the definitive account of one of the most important events of the Cold War. I'm joined by one of its authors, Francis Gary Powers Jr. Gary is the founder of the Cold War Museum. He is, or was a consultant on Steven Spielberg's Cold War thriller, Bridge of Spies. And if the name hasn't given it away, he is the son of Francis Gary Powers, the CIA pilot who was shot down over the USSR in 1960. Gary, thanks for joining me today.
Euan, a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Great. Well, I imagine most of the people watching and most of the Air Zoo's audience know a little bit about the U-2 incident. They have a rough idea about who your father, Gary Powers, was. But can you give us a little bit of a refresher about him and the event that made him famous?
Well, sure. My father was one of the first batches of U-2 pilots that was recruited out of the U.S. Air Force in 1955, 1956 to work for the Central Intelligence Agency, flying the U-2 spy plane over foreign hostile countries. So my dad flew with the U-2 program from 1956 to May 1st of 1960. On that date, he was shot down over the former Soviet Union, over the city of Sverdlovsk in the central part of the Soviet Union, while on a photographic reconnaissance mission. He was captured, interrogated, tried, sentenced to 10 years in prison. He served a total of 21 months before being exchanged for Soviet spy Rudolf Abel on February 10th of 1962. So that's it in a nutshell. It's much more complicated than that, but that's the gist.
Yeah, in the overall context of the Cold War, it was a major turning point. How did the relationship change between the two superpowers at the moment, of the shootdown?
Well, at the time, President Eisenhower was president of the United States. Premier Khrushchev was the president of the Soviet Union. They were trying to work together. They were trying to peacefully coexist, but Eisenhower wanted to gather a little bit more intelligence to prepare for the upcoming summit conference. As a result of my father being shot down, that strained relations. Eisenhower was uninvited to attend a trip to the Soviet Union. The Cold War appeared to be getting hotter. The summit conference that was planned for May 16th in Paris, France, fell apart. Khrushchev stormed out, and it looked like things were going to get very, very heated. Eisenhower basically had gotten caught lying to the American public and the world public about what my father was doing. He and his administration said it was a weather research flight. In fact, it was a CIA spy flight. In addition, because of the time period, there was a lot of rumors and speculation and conspiracy theories as to what took place. At the time in 1960, when my father was shot down, it was easier to blame the pilot than to admit we were behind the Soviets in missile technology. The Soviets had the capability to shoot down the U-2. Dad was the first one shot down. Oh, no. It can't be the Soviets. They're not that smart and advanced. If we don't have that technology, they can't have it. Well, they did. But it took a couple of more months to review and find out. My dad's returned home. He gets debriefed. The CIA realizes he was shot down at altitude. And then you fast forward to the Cuban Missile Crisis, 2 years later, on October 27th of 1962, Major Rudolf Anderson was shot down in a U-2 over Cuba by an SA-2 missile, the same type that shot my father down. That's when the CIA and our political elites realized, oh, they do have that technology. They did shoot down Gary Powers' U-2 as well as Rudolf Anderson's. And that's what clarified and confirmed that it was an actual hit and not sabotage, defection, pilot error, or something else.
Yeah, there was a whole, we'll get into some of the rumors and the, the popular myths about the incident later. But yeah, it just spawned a whole bunch of, conspiracy theories and theories in general about the incident. And for me, it was one of the more, or probably the most important singular incident in the Cold War. As you said, it canceled the Paris summit. It was the first time for the American public at large realized they were being lied to by their government. And it also had, incredible effects on the space race. All of a sudden, aviation wasn't the way to spy on people. The CIA realized, oh, we need satellites now. So this doesn't happen again. For you, what was the biggest consequence of the incident?
From all the research I did, there's a couple. One is in regards to Richard Nixon. He was vice president at the time under Eisenhower. He then goes and runs against Kennedy in the 1960 election. That election takes place November of 1960, about 5 months or so, 6 months or so after the U-2 shootdown. Nixon, in part, blamed the U-2 incident on his defeat against Kennedy. So that's one of the political fallouts that may have happened. Personally, I believe that on TV, Nixon didn't look as good as Kennedy, so Kennedy won.
Famously, he looked very sweaty and sleazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I've also heard that if you listen to it on the radio, Nixon won. If you listen to it on TV and watched on TV, Kennedy won.
It's very interesting. Your book Spy Pilot is really interesting. It's a great read because it's part biography. You know, it talks a lot about your dad and his life. It's part autobiography because it talks about, you know, your life and your relationship with him and his story, and then obviously part history book where it kind of gives a more updated account of the incident once we've got the more documents and declassification and stuff like that.
Right.
Which aspect of the book did you have the most fun writing or researching?
Right. Well, the research that I did took over 30 plus years. I started collecting unpublished memoirs, oral histories from his contemporaries, anything I could get my hands on. I was able to come across 85 of my dad's letters to and from prison that he wrote and or received while incarcerated. I was able to have those letters published, as well as his journal that he kept while incarcerated, into this book, self-published, called Letters from a Soviet Prison. And this is a very unique aspect of his life and what he went through. It's a firsthand account, a primary source, his thoughts, his feelings, his hopes, his despairs while incarcerated. So I thought it was very important for the historical record to have his written words out there for public consumption. That book, those letters, also appear some excerpts in this book. But this book focuses more on what it was like for me to grow up in the shadow of his fame in Southern California, what it was like to lose my father when I was 12 years old, how I adjusted to that as a young adult and an adolescent growing up, running the streets of LA at 2 or 3 in the morning, not getting caught, thank goodness, going up back home at 4 or 5 in the morning, getting up for school the next day, and all that stuff I did as a kid and adolescent growing up and learning. The other aspect of this is the historical record. There's so much misinformation out there about my father, the U-2 incident, the conspiracy theories. Was he a hero? Was he a traitor? Did he do the right thing, the wrong thing? That I wanted to set the record straight. So this book basically takes Dad's reputation from infamy and controversy in the 1960s to that of an American hero today. It goes through the behind-the-scenes process as to how he was ultimately awarded posthumously by our government the POW medal in 2000 and the Silver Star in 2012. Once enough classified information became declassified, that was able to open up the window for the government to help honor Dad as a hero to our country and help to set the record straight. So this book is my life, my story, growing up with my father, and his story, making sure that the truth was finally told.
But right, obviously, you know, your dad died when you were pretty young at 12. So throughout this like 30 plus years of research, what's the most surprising thing that you've learned about him?
That's a very good question. The most surprising thing I've learned about my dad. One of the things I uncovered was that he was baptized in Georgia shortly before he was married to his first wife. Never knew that before. Another thing I learned early on when I first started doing research when I was in college at Cal State Northridge in Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley. I went into their library, was looking through periodicals and things, and I discovered he was on the cover of Time magazine in May of '60. So
it's kind of a big deal, you know. Like,
so in when was that? I was about 20 years old. So 1985, I'm finding out for the first time that Dad was on the cover of Time and other magazines. So that was really a very unique experience for me. Wow, Dad's on the cover of Time magazine. So that kind of started the spark for me to do more and more research. And over the last 35 plus years, I was able to talk to his contemporaries that flew with him, that he worked with, lived with, interacted with, either in the CIA, the Air Force, or other agencies. I was able to talk to his contemporaries and get their stories to find out more about my father. In addition to doing the research in the libraries, the periodicals, the newspapers, and reading all the fake news of the time, that it was really unique. The fake news, for example, he defected, he landed the plane, he spilled his guts and told the Soviets everything he knew. All of this misinformation that's still out there on the internet today originated in the newspapers back in the 1960s.
Yeah, let's if you don't mind, let's talk about some of those now, because ever since I told people like, hey, you know, I'm going to be interviewing you about your book, you know, I automatically end up talking about the incident and about your dad, and then I've had to, you know, correct people about some of the common myths and stuff. So I figured we could just take some time to talk about some of the big ones and set the record straight. Now, obviously, the biggest one, probably the most distressing one to hear for as the son as well, is that, you know, Gary Powers, he was supposed to or ordered, you know, to kill himself via poison upon capture. Now, that's complete bunk. That's completely wrong.
That is not true. Now, let me clarify everything. It is true that the pilots were given the option of taking a quote unquote suicide device with them on these missions. It was a poison tipped needle hidden in a silver dollar, worn around your neck as a good luck charm. The orders, the situation, the pilots were briefed. They were told, if you're caught, you will be tortured. Here is a way to alleviate the pain and suffering. It was an optional device to take, an optional device to use at the pilot's discretion in the event of torture, not in the event of capture. But once Dad is on the ground, he has this device on him. As he's parachuting to the ground, he takes the dollar, he takes out the needle, he throws the dollar away because he's thinking the dollar is going to be a souvenir. Some Russian's going to want this dollar. So he gets the dollar, takes the pin, puts it in his flight suit pocket. On the third strip search, the KGB find the device. My dad goes, oh, be very careful with that. He did not want to have a murder conviction on top of an espionage conviction. He is already in enough trouble.
He's already on thin ice, you know?
Exactly. The Soviets test the device on a dog. The dog dies in 20 seconds of asphyxiation. Khrushchev comes up and says, oh, look at these evil Americans. This is what they give their spy pilots to commit suicide with. This one wanted to live to see another day. And from that moment on, Dad had disobeyed orders in the public opinion arena. But that's, again, not the case. The orders were, and I have to paraphrase, if capture appears imminent, pilots should take a cooperative attitude toward their captors. They are free to talk about the missions of flying over countries and taking photographs. They should not talk about the airplane details or the specifications of the equipment on board. So basically, Dad did everything he was supposed to do. He followed his orders to a T. When he gets back home and is debriefed by the CIA for 3 weeks at a safe house in Maryland, they realize, oh, he did everything he was supposed to do. The CIA exonerates him. They clear him. He then appears before a Senate Select Committee hearing in March of '62. The senators, 8 hours of deliberations and questions back and forth. At the end of the session, they exonerate him. They clear him. The Senate's cleared him. The CIA has cleared him. But because of the fake news of the time, the court of public opinion had not yet cleared him. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write the book, is to set the record straight.
Yeah, you touched there on one of the other things that didn't happen, what a lot of people seem to think was, you know, that he was tortured or brainwashed inside the Soviet prison. But from reading some of the letters he wrote, seemed to have a pretty typical, boring, you know, time in Soviet prison. I mean, he was in Soviet prison, not great, but also seemed like it could have been a lot worse, or he was expecting a lot worse.
Well, he was expecting to get the death penalty. And then he gets 10 years and he's thinking, well, I didn't get the death penalty, but now I've got 10 years. And the Soviet prison system is not like America. You don't get 3 meals a day. You don't get air conditioning. You don't get color TV. You are in a 12-foot by 8-foot cell with a roommate, a cellmate. You've got no way to look out of the window, but light does come in. A small incandescent light bulb is on 24 hours a day on the ceiling, and you get stir crazy. I mean, there's nothing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So he occupied his time by reading books, writing letters back and forth to family, writing in his journal, playing chess with his cellmate, or trying to cope with the day-to-day monotony of prison life. In his journal, you could see the highs and the lows, the depression over some months of setting in. Then he's happy. He thinks he's going to be exchanged. He thinks he's going to be released. It doesn't happen. He goes back into a depression. So through his letters and through his writings from prison, you can see this roller coaster ride that he went through while incarcerated.
Yeah, it didn't seem like a fun time, but I guess certainly better than what the CIA was hyping him up to be.
Correct.
And
it was better because it is documented that other prisoners were tortured and executed.
Mm-hmm.
So Dad, compared to that, was very lucky. There was no physical abuse, no physical torture, but there was mental. 16-hour days, bright spotlight, grueling questions, threats of death, sleep deprivation. So there was that type of an emotional toll, but not a physical toll. Well, physical, he did lose 30 pounds in prison. The diet was atrocious. So, there was some physical ailments that resulted from his incarceration, but there was no physical torture, thank goodness.
And another one was, the brainwashing as well. It seems like he kind of noticed, there was an interesting bit in the book where it's kind of like, oh, I can see why people would think you would get brainwashed if you're always just taking in, the propaganda.
Yep.
But
no, let me expand on that.
Yeah.
So Dad was able to get access to certain newspapers, magazines, and books, but he could not get anything from the West. No Time, no Newsweek, no Washington Post, no New York Times, anything like that. He could.
I think it was only The Nation. Maybe he got.
He was able to get from I just blanked on the name. Give me a second. He got the Daily Worker from the UK, which was a socialist newspaper.
I am familiar with. When I lived in the UK, I was used to them selling it out front of the train station.
Yeah, there we go. So the Daily Worker. So then he could get a Pravda, which is the Soviets' newspaper. Pravda means truth, but it was the state-run newspaper. His roommate, his cellmate, would translate it. So he could get information from the outside world, but it was always from a socialist or a Soviet perspective.
Another one of the big rumors that was kind of helped, not dispelled as quickly as you'd expect them, but one of the rumors that the CIA really held on to and believed was that he must have flown to a lower altitude, perhaps even defected on purpose.
Right.
But we now know that that was definitely not the case.
Correct. Yes. At the time, the CIA realized that the Soviets were improving their weapons system. The May 1st mission was to fly over the city of Sverdlovsk to take photographs of an SA-2 base that they knew was being built. Well, Dad flies over this area. The SA-2s are now operational, unbeknownst to the CIA. Dad's mission is to find out if they are operational, and he finds out firsthand they are. But at the time, again, the CIA, the analysts, our military leaders just could not bring themselves to admit that the Soviets were more advanced than we were, that they had the missile capability, that they had the radar capability, that they should shoot down a U-2. Oh, no, they can't do that. We don't have that technology. If we don't have it, they can't have it. They're behind us. Well, they did. And it took a few years to finally confirm that. Even though my dad was exonerated and cleared, there were still some doubts in certain people's heads until Rudolph Anderson was shot down on October 27th of 62.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy just hearing that even those right at the tippy top of the CIA still really couldn't bring themselves to believe that this could happen. And you see that in reading the history of the U2 program as well. immediately they thought we can fly this over Russia or over the Soviet Union. They'll never be able to pick us up on the radar. And they got picked up immediately.
Yep.
And that was kind of kept quite secret and hidden and not really expressed as probably as clear as it should be to Eisenhower, so
Right.
he was okaying these missions that had a much higher risk than he might have known. There's obviously a whole bunch of other rumors and stuff. What's the one that's the most out there for you that you've heard and you're just like, whoa, I've not heard that one before?
Well, I've heard them all now.
Okay.
But the most funny, the funniest, the most bizarre is that it was an encounter with the UFO that brought down the plane. I mean, so it goes from the potential possibility of, hey, yeah, he did have a flame out, quote unquote, that brought him down. That is plausible, to the absurd of interacting with a UFO. Now, at the time, again, the U-2s that flew at 70 to 75,000 feet. If you flew a little too slow and you dipped below a certain throttle speed, then the engine would conk out. And in order to relight the engine, you would have to descend to about 35,000 feet, relight the engine, and then come back up. So for many months, while my father was incarcerated, many years, he was there for almost 2 years, that was the most likely reason. Something happened with the fuel, something happened with the engine, there was sabotage, something happened that forced the plane to a lower altitude. But no, that was not the case. Dad was at his assigned altitude of 70,500 feet on May 1st over the city of Sverdlovsk when he was shot down by the near miss of 8 Soviet SA-2 missiles, one of which was exploded close enough to the tail section to cause structural failure.
Yeah. And one of those missiles as well, we talks about in your book, also hit a Soviet MiG, a bit of friendly fire, which was is an incident that wasn't well known. It was kept obviously secret for a long time. And you kind of acted, because this is such like a secretive incident or whatever, you kind of became almost like a semi-ambassador, helping, to when you laid the wreath on that pilot's grave. What was that experience like?
So yes, as a result of my research, I was contacted by Sergei Safronov's son. Sergei Safronov is the MiG pilot who was shot down on May 1st, 1960, instead of my father. He was hit by friendly fire, and he died as a result of that shoot down. So back about 10 or 15 years ago, I met with the pilot's son at the Cold War Museum near Washington, D.C. We had an interpreter, and we had about, 3, 4, 5 hour conversation back and forth. His life, my life, what it was like to grow up in the Soviet Union, what it was like to grow up in LA, California, our dads, our moms, and just what it was like for each of us. At the end of the conversation, he goes, "Mr. Powers, my mother has a message for you." And I'm going, oh no, what is he going to say? And he relays that his mother does not blame my father for her husband's death. My dad was following orders. Her husband was following orders. It was not my dad's fault that her husband died from friendly fire. So I took that to heart. I was very glad that there was no animosity between our two families. So when I went to Russia for the 4th time in December of 2017, while I'm finishing up my book and doing the final research, I make an effort to go and pay my respects to Sergei Safronov at the memorial in Sverdlovsk, where he was shot down, where the plane landed and he died. So I asked my host to stop at a flower shop. I got some roses. I get up and go and lay these flowers down at this memorial in honor of this Soviet MiG fighter pilot. And I wanted to pay my respects. I wanted to show his family that there was no animosity on our side either. I wanted to show the Russian people that I wanted to pay respect to one of their heroes of their countries, and to try to make sure that they understood that I'm there to help set the record straight, to help honor both sides of the Cold War, and to make sure that people learn from the Cold War. It's so important to study history. It's so important to learn from past events and activities so that it doesn't happen again. Unfortunately, it's happening again. Ukraine, Putin, we're backing one side, he's coming in. There's, it's Cold War 2.0. You think we'd learn from our past history, but we don't.
I think the forward of your book really sets it up nicely, where it kind of just reiterates the point that on both sides, there were just guys doing their job and doing what they thought was the best thing for their country, for their people, and ultimately for the world. And I think it's important. It's funny because it's a story we see a lot. At the Air Zoo, we're talking about we have an F-117, and one of those got shot down, and the pilot who survived that incident and the guy who shot him down, they're buds now.
Right.
They're friends now, because at the end of the day, we're just doing a job. Good shot, well done. So I think it's something to remember, that at the end of the day, they're just guys doing jobs.
Yeah. Now, very interesting point there. Back in 1997, June, I was on a spy tour of Moscow. It was organized by retired KGB, Northwest Mounted Police, FBI, CIA, all these people who were in the field at the time, who are now retired, probably 65 to 70 years old or so, or older, were on this tour. And so at one of the dinners, Oleg, one of the KGB agents who was in Washington, D.C., doing his spy stuff back in the Cold War time period, was sitting down with Charlie from the FBI, drinking beer, having some vodka shots, talking about, oh, yeah, I was following you at this street. You lost me there. I picked you back up over here. They were reminiscing about the good old days.
Just business, Is there obviously there's been a long amount of time since the incident now, and there's been a lot of things declassified, so we've been able to get more of the truth. Do you know anything that's still classified about the incident, or stuff that's been destroyed?
Yes. Well, I don't know what is still classified, because if I did, I'd probably get into trouble since I'm a civilian. But I do know from the declassification conference that happened in, I want to say 1998. No, 1996, I think. Sometime right about then. The CIA and the Air Force declassified the U-2 program 1954 to 1974. And a lot of stuff was revealed during that conference and in the transcriptions of the conference in the declassified files. Two of the most important things that I found was that, one, Dad was shot down at his assigned altitude, 70,500 feet. That was finally declassified. It also declassified at the time that it was a joint CIA Air Force operation. For all intent and purposes, it was a military operation. The CIA could not be separated from the military. They were that closely in bed together working on this program. When that word military was declassified, that's what allowed the American government to finally step up to the plate, set the record straight, and honor Dad as a hero to our country. Because of the word military, that allowed him to receive the POW medal and the Silver Star. It was allowed to count his time in service with the CIA as military service. And that was what really allowed the government to finally, after almost 40, 50 years, to help set the record straight and document this for the record.
Yeah, because for people who don't know, the process of becoming a U-2 pilot for the CIA was essentially you were supposed to resign your commission with the Air Force, then you take on some job with a Lockheed, I guess, or
a State Department, NASA,
someone who you don't work for. You're really working for the CIA boys. And then and the understanding was, once you did your time in the U-2, you could get slotted back into the Air Force at a higher rank.
Well, at a rank comparable to your peers.
Yeah.
You would not lose any duty time or any time towards retirement once you went back in.
And that was something that wasn't awarded, by the sounds of it, wasn't really awarded to your dad when he came back. It sounds like they didn't, I mean, I don't want to say for obvious reasons, but I mean, as a guy who was shot down, spent some time in the Soviet prison, they weren't necessarily forthcoming to welcome him back into the fold.
Well, that's correct, because he had a stigma. He was the known spy. Did he defect? Did he collaborate with the enemy? Is he going to, learn new secrets here and relay them over to them? It was all paranoia of the time of the Cold War. So it affected my father's reputation. It tarnished it. I believe personally, though I have not found any evidence of this yet, is that the Air Force said, oh, you're a known spy. if we hire you back and take you back into our ranks, then we will be accused of employing spies. Not a good reputation for the Air Force to have. So I believe that Kelly Johnson was asked to hire my father. Kelly offered him a job. Dad took it. He flew with Lockheed Aircraft Corporation from 63 to 70 as a U-2 test pilot. At that time, Lockheed was happy they had a pilot. Dad was happy he was flying. The U.S. Air Force was happy they didn't have Dad. So it all worked out. Then in 1970, Dad writes his book, goes on the lecture circuit, promoting the book for a few years, then ends up flying for radio and television stations in Los Angeles, reporting on news, weather, and traffic for the rush hour commutes and the evening news.
Obviously, you're the biggest advocate for Gary Powers and clearing his name and getting the record straight. And that role managed to land you a consultant role on the Steven Spielberg film Bridge of Spies. What was it like working on that?
Yes, well, to clarify my role in my advocacy for my dad, yes, I'm the spearhead. I helped to set the record straight. I realized a long time ago that no one else was going to do it. I am Francis Gary Powers Jr. I have his name with a junior at the end. So it kind of fell on me by default to find out the truth. So I knew how to answer these questions, so that I knew how to respond to the misinformation, the fake news, and the conspiracy theories that were out there. Along the way, I didn't realize what I was doing. I didn't intentionally start out to honor my dad. All I wanted to do was to find out the truth, so I knew how to answer these questions. And along the way, I was able to honor my father, as well as other Cold War veterans that need to be honored, recognized for their service to our country. These Cold War veterans fought, sacrificed, some died during this 46-year conflict, and I wanted to make sure that all Cold War veterans are honored for their service to our country. But that's just the back scene. Now, in regards to your question and the movie Bridge of Spies, yes, I was a consultant on the movie. I interacted with director Spielberg, Tom Hanks, who played James Donovan, the attorney who brokered the exchange. I sat down and talked shop with Austin Stoll, who was the young man who portrayed my father in the movie. I basically answered questions, provided photographs that they could Photoshop and put their actors' heads on, provided audio tapes of my dad speaking about his experiences so that they could listen firsthand to what he had gone through. And then on 2 occasions, I was on set, once in New York City when they were filming the Supreme Court scene. Now, we know the Supreme Court's in Washington, D.C., but it's Hollywood. So they were able to make one of the buildings in New York City look like the Supreme Court. I was at Beale Air Force Base in California, right above Sacramento. And this is where the pilots were being briefed during the pilot briefing scene. That's where the U-2 took off on the May 1st mission. The exterior of the hangars were painted with palm trees in Arabic language to look like it was in Pakistan. So they're making this military air base in California look like the Middle East. So it was very unique to see how they work their magic once you're looking on both sides of the screen.
Now, another really thing that I am most jealous about is that you managed to land yourself a little trip flying inside a U-2. Can you tell me about that? Because that is just incredible. I don't allow the lit civilians do that.
There's been a handful of civilians that have flown in the U-2. And the 2 or 3 I used to know off the top of my head, I can't think of right now. Joan Landon, I think. Joan London, I believe, got a flight. The guy who used to do the car show, and I forgot what it's called, he got a flight I'm aware of. Chris Pocock, a British national of all things, was able to get a flight. Because
there is hope for me then. Okay.
Chris Pocock is the leading historian on the U-2 program, and he's made friends with most of the U-2 pilots, old and new. So he was able to get a flight back in the day. My flight took place on May 1st of 2000, the 40th anniversary of the U-2 incident. It was a result of the declassification conference in 1998. The military wanted to award my father the POW medal. So some U-2 pilots who I'm friends with, Buzz Carpenter, Chuck Wilson, who currently runs the Cold War Museum, were able to work a PR move so that while Dad was going to be awarded the POW medal and all the pomp and circumstance that comes with that, they were able to authorize me to have a U-2 flight prior to the awards ceremony. So I was able to go over to Beale Air Force Base, got into the pressure suit, the space suit, went through the what do you call it, the pressure chamber to make sure that I wasn't claustrophobic, I wouldn't endanger the pilot or the plane, went through training. And on May 1st, I took this flight 3 hours from Beale Air Force Base over Sacramento, over San Francisco, over Los Angeles, then back down to Beale. I reached an altitude of about a little above 73,000 feet. And I was able to see the curvature of the Earth, look out of the cockpit up into the sky, just pitch black. Very unique experience. But more importantly, that was the day that Dad was bestowed the POW medal by the United States government.
That's incredible. That's just, it's so cool. And I couldn't but notice Buzz Carpenter, you know, he's come to our museum a couple of times now as part of our Spyposium. Great guy. So it was always fun to spot his name in there. So he pops up in a whole bunch of books like that. Buzz. Just reading other things, and there he pops up. I'm like, this guy's connected. This guy gets things done. Yeah. I think for my final question I have for you, when people hear the name Gary Powers, what would you like people to think of?
I've never been asked that before. Boy.
Or like, what do you want? Like, what do you want his reputation to be?
Well, I mean, I want over the last 30 years, all the research I've done, all the things I've been through to honor Dad, to honor Cold War veterans, to do all the stuff I've done. I want people to realize that Dad was a normal Joe Schmo. He was just like you. He was just like me. He had thoughts and feelings and hopes and despairs. He wanted to make a better life for his family and his children. He lived the American dream. He was born into a very impoverished area in Southwest Virginia. His dad was a coal miner. His dad owned a shoe shop that helped to fix the miners' shoes. Dad was the first of his family to go to college. And he realized that the Air Force was a way for him to continue to explore and have adventure outside of the Southwest Virginia town where most people ended up working in the coal mines. So for my father, he was just a normal guy who was caught up in extraordinary circumstances that put him into the history books.
I think that's, and for me, you know, at least the book, it paints him as just a regular guy who just, you know, was doing his job, was doing what his country asked for him to do, and was unfortunately branded, you know, a traitor, or branded, you know, with all this suspicion for doing exactly what he was asked to do. And I think it's a real shame. And I'm very happy. You know, I think the work you're doing is fantastic. And you know, I think, you know, campaigning to get him all the awards, you know, the Silver Star and stuff like that, really important, because, you know, in history, 100 years or so, that's what people are going to see.
Exactly. They'll know there's controversy. They'll know there are conspiracy theories, but they'll also realize that the American government awarded him the Silver Star and the POW medal, and they wouldn't do that if he was a traitor.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Gary, for joining me today. The book Spy Pilot, Francis Gary Powers, the U-2 Incident and a Controversial Cold War Legacy, is available now at the Air Zoo's Flyby Museum gift store.